I've always prided myself on being tough. Growing up in a small town in Georgia, where the humidity clings to your skin like a second layer and the cicadas sing you to sleep every night, you learn to weather storms both literal and figurative. But nothing could have prepared me for the tempest that was about to hit my life. The house I lived in wasn't just any old place. It was my childhood home, a modest two-story with a wraparound porch that had seen better days but still stood proud on Magnolia Street. Every creaky floorboard and chipped paint spot told a story, of my dad teaching me to ride a bike in the driveway, of Mom's famous peach cobbler cooling on the windowsill, of late-night giggles with my best friend Sally during sleepovers. When both my parents passed away, leaving me this house, it became more than just a building. It was my anchor, my connection to everything I'd ever known and loved. I remember the day I brought Daniel home for the first time. We'd been dating for a few months, and I was nervous about him seeing this old place. But he surprised me. He walked in, took a deep breath, and said, "Smells like home." That's when I knew he was the one. We got married in the backyard, under the big oak tree where Dad used to push me on a tire swing. For the first few years, everything was perfect. We talked about fixing up the place, maybe starting a family of our own to fill these rooms with new laughter. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It started with little things, Daniel coming home later and later from work, the worry lines on his forehead getting deeper. I chalked it up to stress at his job at the local bank. Then came the phone calls, hushed conversations he'd have on the porch when he thought I was asleep. I didn't want to pry, didn't want to be that nagging wife. So I kept quiet, hoping whatever it was would pass. Then, one muggy summer evening, as we sat on our worn-out couch, the same one where I'd curled up with Dad to watch Saturday morning cartoons, Daniel dropped the bomb. "Sam," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "my mom's sick. Real sick." I felt my heart sink. Marie, Daniel's mom, had always been kind to me, treating me like the daughter she never had. She made the best sweet tea in 3 counties and never forgot to call on my birthday. "How bad is it?" I asked, already dreading the answer. Daniel's eyes, usually full of that boyish charm that made me fall for him, now looked hollow. "Cancer. Stage 4. The doctors say, they say there's a treatment, but..." He trailed off, and I knew what was coming next. We'd been struggling financially for a while now, what with the economy taking a nosedive and Daniel's hours at the bank getting cut. "How much?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. He told me the figure, and I felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. It was more money than we'd ever see in our lifetime, working the jobs we had in this small town. That's when he said it, the words that would change everything. "Sam, I hate to ask this, but what if we sold the house?" I felt like I'd been slapped. Sell the house? My house? The only thing I had left of my parents? I wanted to scream, to tell him he was crazy for even suggesting it. But then I looked at his face, saw the desperation there, and I bit my tongue. "We can't," I said instead, trying to keep my voice steady. "Daniel, this house, it's all I have left. We'll figure something else out." "We always do." He nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. That night, as we lay in bed, I could feel the distance between us growing, even though we were inches apart. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's pleas became more frequent, more desperate. "Sam, please," he'd say, his voice cracking. "Mom doesn't have much time left. This treatment, it's her only chance." I tried everything I could think of. I picked up extra shifts at the diner where I waitressed, even though my feet ached and my back screamed in protest. I looked into loans, but our credit wasn't good enough. I even thought about asking Sally for help, but I knew she was struggling to make ends meet with her 3 kids. All the while, I could feel the judgment from others in town. Word travels fast in a place like this, and soon everyone knew about Marie's condition and our dilemma. I'd catch whispers at the grocery store, see pitying looks at church on Sundays. "Poor Marie," they'd say. "And that Samantha, still holding on to that old house while her mother-in-law suffers." The pressure was unbearable. Daniel grew more distant with each passing day. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and dreams for the future, now revolved solely around money and Marie's deteriorating health. I'd catch him staring at old family photos, his eyes lingering on pictures of his mom, healthy and smiling. One particularly hot night, as the cicadas chirped their endless song outside our window, Daniel and I had our biggest fight yet. "You're being selfish," he yelled, his face red with anger and frustration. "It's just a house, Sam. We're talking about my mother's life." His words cut deep, deeper than I thought possible. Was I being selfish? Was I really putting an old building above the life of a woman who had shown me nothing but kindness? The guilt gnawed at me, making sleep impossible. I'd lie awake, listening to Daniel's uneven breathing beside me, wondering how we'd gotten to this point. The final straw came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. We were sitting on the porch, the air thick with unspoken words, when Daniel's phone rang. It was the hospital. Marie had taken a turn for the worse. As Daniel talked, his voice shaking, I watched a single tear roll down his cheek. In that moment, looking at the man I loved, broken and desperate, something inside me shattered. All the memories this house held, all the love it represented, none of it mattered if it meant losing Daniel, losing the family I'd gained through him. "Okay," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the creaking of the porch swing. "Okay, Daniel. We'll sell the house." The look on his face, relief, gratitude, love, almost made it worth it. Almost. As he hugged me tight, whispering thank you over and over, I felt a piece of my heart break off and drift away, like a leaf on the wind. That night, as I walked through the rooms of my childhood home, trailing my fingers along the familiar walls, I tried to memorize every detail. The chip in the kitchen counter where I'd dropped Mom's favorite vase. The height marks on the doorframe, tracking my growth over the years. The smell of old wood and lemon polish that I'd always associated with home. I knew I was doing the right thing, the only thing I could do. But as I curled up in bed that night, listening to the sounds of the house settling around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing more than just a building. I was losing a part of myself, a connection to my past that I'd never be able to get back. Little did I know, as I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, that this sacrifice was just the beginning. The storm I thought I was weathering was nothing compared to the hurricane that was about to hit. But that's the thing about life, just when you think you've given all you can give, it demands more. And sometimes, the price of love is higher than we ever imagined. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling in my gut. You know that sensation when you're half asleep and can't remember if something was a dream or reality? That's how I felt. But as soon as I opened my eyes and saw the boxes scattered around our bedroom, reality came crashing down. This wasn't a dream. I was really selling my childhood home. Daniel was already up, his side of the bed cold. I could hear him moving around downstairs, probably making coffee. As I got dressed, I tried to shake off the dread that was settling over me like a heavy blanket. It's for a good cause, I kept telling myself. It's to save Marie. When I made my way to the kitchen, Daniel was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. He looked up when he saw me, flashed a quick smile, and then turned away. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off. These past few weeks had been stressful for both of us, and I figured he was probably talking to the hospital about his mom. "Morning," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Everything okay?" Daniel ended his call abruptly. "Yeah, just finalizing some details for the sale." He didn't meet my eyes as he said it, focusing instead on stirring his coffee with an intensity that seemed unwarranted for such a simple task. "Oh," I replied, surprised. "I didn't realize we were moving that fast with it." He shrugged, still not looking at me. "No point in dragging it out, right? The sooner we do this, the sooner Mom can start her treatment." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The lump in my throat felt like it was growing by the second. I wanted to scream, to grab Daniel by the shoulders and shake him, to make him understand what this house meant to me. But I didn't. Instead, I sipped my coffee and stared out the kitchen window at the old oak tree in the backyard. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Daniel was on the phone constantly, stepping out of earshot whenever I came near. I busied myself with packing, carefully wrapping each framed photo and knick-knack in newspaper. Each item held a memory, and as I packed them away, I felt like I was boxing up pieces of my soul. By evening, Daniel announced that the sale was complete. Just like that. No fanfare, no final walkthrough of the house, no chance for me to say a proper goodbye to the place that had been my anchor for so long. How? I asked, bewildered. Don't these things usually take longer? Daniel waved his hand dismissively. I found a cash buyer. They were willing to move quickly. He seemed almost excited. It didn't sit right with me, but I was too emotionally drained to question it further. That night, as we lay in bed for what I thought would be the last time in this house, Daniel held me close. Thank you, he whispered into my hair. I know how hard this is for you. I promise, we'll make new memories in our new place. And Mom, she's going to be so grateful. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. As I drifted off to sleep, I tried to memorize the sounds of the house, the creaky floorboard in the hallway, the gentle hum of the old refrigerator, the wind rustling through the oak leaves outside our window. I never thought I'd miss these small, everyday noises so much. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. This wasn't unusual. Daniel often got up early. But something felt off. The house was too quiet. No coffee brewing, no shower running, no sounds of Daniel moving around downstairs. Daniel? I called out, my voice echoing in the empty house. No response. As I got out of bed, a chill ran down my spine. Daniel's closet door was open, and I could see empty hangers where his clothes should have been. His suitcase, the one we'd used on our honeymoon to Savannah, was gone. My heart racing, I ran downstairs, calling his name. The living room was untouched, our boxes still stacked neatly by the door. But Daniel's car keys were missing from the hook by the front door. His wallet, which he always left on the kitchen counter, was gone too. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed Daniel's number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. And again. Each time, that cheerful voice, "Hey, you've reached Daniel. Leave a message," felt like a punch to the gut. I sank onto the couch, our couch, the one where we'd spent countless evenings watching movies and planning our future. My mind was spinning. Where was Daniel? Where was Marie? Surely, if they'd gone to the hospital for her treatment, he would have woken me up, right? As if on cue, my phone pinged with an email notification. Hoping it was Daniel explaining everything, I opened it eagerly. But what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a message from Daniel. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, with attached documents. Divorce papers. Freshly filed. I stared at the screen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Divorce. But we were happy. We were in love. We were supposed to be starting a new chapter of our lives together, weren't we? With trembling fingers, I scrolled through the document. There, in black and white, was the truth I'd been too blind to see. The house hadn't been sold to pay for Marie's treatment. It had been sold, and the money was gone. Transferred to an account I didn't recognize. The realization hit me like a freight train. There was no sick mother. No urgent medical treatment. It had all been a lie. A carefully orchestrated plan to get me to sell the house, to get access to the money. And I had fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at nothing, my mind replaying every moment of the past few weeks. Every hushed phone call, every averted gaze, every time Daniel had pushed just a little harder for me to agree to the sale. It all made sense now, in the most horrific way possible. As the shock began to wear off, a new emotion took its place. Anger. No, not just anger. Fury. White-hot, all-consuming rage. I had given up everything for this man. My home, my memories, my connection to my parents. And he had taken it all and vanished, leaving me with nothing but a broken heart and divorce papers. I stood up, my legs shaky but my resolve strengthening with each passing second. I wouldn't let this break me. I couldn't. I was Samantha Evans, daughter of John and Mary Evans, raised to be strong, to weather any storm. And this was just another storm. With a deep breath, I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. As I stood there, looking out at the backyard where Daniel and I had exchanged our vows, I made a promise to myself. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but I knew one thing for certain. Daniel would rue the day he decided to cross me. He thought he had won, thought he had left me broken and defeated. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated me. As I stood in the kitchen of the home that was no longer mine, surrounded by the ghosts of my past and the wreckage of my present, I felt something stirring within me. It wasn't just anger or a desire for revenge. It was a determination, a fierce resolve to reclaim what was rightfully mine and to make Daniel pay for his betrayal. I looked around the kitchen one last time, at the worn countertops where I'd learned to bake with my mom, at the height marks on the doorframe tracking my growth over the years. Each memory, each piece of my history that Daniel had so callously discarded, fueled the fire growing inside me. With steady hands, I picked up my phone and typed out a message. Short, simple, but loaded with promise. You made a mistake. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then, taking a deep breath, I started to plan my next move. Daniel might have won this round, but the game was far from over. And I, Samantha Evans, was just getting started. I've always heard that revenge is a dish best served cold. But as I stood in the kitchen of what used to be my home, my anger burning hot enough to melt steel, I wasn't feeling particularly patient. The urge to lash out, to scream, to break something was almost overwhelming. But that's not who I am. That's not how I was raised. Instead, I took a deep breath and looked around the kitchen one last time. The faded curtains my mom had sewn when I was just a kid, the worn linoleum floor that had seen countless family dinners, the ancient coffee maker that somehow still worked despite being older than me. Each familiar sight was a reminder of what Daniel had taken from me. But I wouldn't let him see me break. That's what he expected, I realized. He thought I'd crumble, that I'd be too devastated to function. Well, he had another thing coming. With trembling hands that I forced to steady, I picked up my phone again. The divorce papers still glared at me from the screen, a digital slap in the face. I closed the email and opened my messages. There sat my text to Daniel, "You made a mistake." 4 simple words. But they held a promise. A threat. A declaration of war. I half expected an immediate response. An angry call, a dismissive text, something. But as the minutes ticked by, my phone remained silent. The silence was deafening, filling the empty house with an oppressive weight that threatened to crush me. But I wouldn't let it. I couldn't. Instead, I started to move. First, I called Sally. Sweet, dependable Sally, who had been my best friend since we were kids climbing trees in the backyard. Sam. Her voice was thick with sleep. It was early, I realized. The world had shifted on its axis for me, but for everyone else, it was just another Tuesday morning. What's wrong? I opened my mouth to explain, but suddenly found I couldn't speak. How do you tell your best friend that your entire life has been a lie? That the man you loved, the man she had stood beside at your wedding, had betrayed you in the worst possible way? Sam. Sally's voice was sharper now, worried. Are you okay? Do you need me to come over? He's gone, I finally managed to choke out. Daniel, he's gone. And the house. Sally, he took everything. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, then the sound of movement. I'm on my way, Sally said, her voice hard with determination. Don't move, okay? I'll be there in 10 minutes. True to her word, Sally arrived in record time, still in her pajamas, her hair a mess. She took one look at me, standing lost in the middle of the kitchen, and wrapped me in a hug so tight I could barely breathe. But it was exactly what I needed. As I sobbed into her shoulder, the full weight of what had happened finally hit me. My home was gone. My husband was gone. The life I thought I had, the future I had planned, all of it, gone in the blink of an eye. But as quickly as the despair came, it was replaced by that burning anger again. I pulled away from Sally, wiping my eyes. I'm going to find him, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm going to find him, and I'm going to make him pay. Sally looked at me, her eyes wide with concern. Sam. I know you're hurting, but revenge isn't the answer. We should call the police, report the fraud. I shook my head. No. Not yet. The police, they'll just tell me it's a civil matter. That I willingly signed over the house. And they'd be right. I laughed bitterly. God, I was so stupid. You weren't stupid, Sally said fiercely. You were trusting. There's a difference. I gave her a weak smile. Maybe. But trust is what got me into this mess. It's not going to get me out. For the next few hours, Sally and I sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and trying to piece together what had happened. I told her everything, the late-night phone calls, the pressure to sell the house, the too smooth sale. With each detail, I could see the anger growing in Sally's eyes, mirroring my own. That bastard, she muttered, her hands clenched around her coffee mug. I never liked him, you know. Always thought he was too smooth, too perfect. I raised an eyebrow at her. You were my maid of honor. She had the grace to look sheepish. I know. I thought maybe I was just being overprotective. That if you were happy, I should be happy for you. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Thank you, I said softly, for being here now. As the day wore on, my phone remained stubbornly silent. No response from Daniel. No frantic calls asking what I meant. Nothing. Maybe he's just ignoring you, Sally suggested as we picked at the sandwiches she'd made for lunch. Trying to pretend none of this is happening. I shook my head. No. He's scared. I know him, Sal. He's probably sitting somewhere, staring at his phone, trying to figure out what I know. And that's when it hit me. The perfect way to keep him off balance, to make him sweat. I picked up my phone and typed out another message. Tick-tock, Daniel. Sally read the message over my shoulder and grinned. Oh, that's good. Cryptic. Ominous. I hit send, feeling a small thrill of satisfaction. He thinks he's so smart, I said. Let's see how he likes not knowing what's coming. As evening fell, Sally reluctantly had to leave. She had kids to feed, a life to get back to. But she made me promise to call if I needed anything, day or night. After she left, the house felt emptier than ever. I wandered from room to room, touching familiar objects, saying goodbye in my own way. In our bedroom, I found one of Daniel's shirts that he'd missed in his hasty packing. Without thinking, I brought it to my face, inhaling deeply. It still smelled like him, a mix of his cologne and something uniquely Daniel. For a moment, I felt my resolve waver. This was the man I had loved, the man I had planned to spend my life with. How had it all gone so wrong? But then I remembered the betrayal, the lies, the casual cruelty of leaving me with nothing but divorce papers and an empty house. My grip on the shirt tightened, and before I knew what I was doing, I was ripping it to shreds. As pieces of fabric fluttered to the ground, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. I spent the rest of the evening making plans. I might not have my house anymore, but I had my savings, money I'd been quietly putting aside for years, dreaming of maybe starting my own business one day. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a small apartment, enough to start over. As I packed what little I had left into boxes, my phone finally buzzed. A message from Daniel. Sam, please. Whatever you think you know, we can talk about this. Just tell me where you are. I stared at the message, a humorless smile tugging at my lips. He was scared, all right. Good. I typed out a response, my fingers flying over the keys. Oh, now you want to talk? Bit late for that, don't you think? Don't worry, Daniel. You'll see me soon enough. With that, I turned off my phone. Let him stew in his own juices for a while. I had work to do. As I carried the last of my boxes out to my car, I paused on the front porch. The porch swing creaked in the gentle evening breeze, the sound achingly familiar. For a moment, I was tempted to sit down, to lose myself in memories of happier times. But I shook off the urge. Those times were gone, as dead and buried as my parents. It was time to look forward, not back. I took one last look at the house that had been my whole world for so long. Goodbye, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Then I turned, got in my car, and drove away without looking back. As I navigated the familiar streets of my hometown, a plan was already forming in my mind. Daniel thought he had one, thought he had left me broken and helpless. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. And that was going to cost him everything. I've always heard that time heals all wounds, but whoever said that clearly never had their entire life ripped away from them in the span of a single morning. The days following Daniel's disappearance blurred together in a haze of anger, grief, and determination. I'd moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, just a bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room that doubled as my office, but it was mine. No memories of Daniel here, no ghosts of my past life lurking in the corners. It was a fresh start, even if it wasn't the one I'd ever imagined for myself. I'd been ignoring Daniel's increasingly frantic messages and calls. Each one was more desperate than the last, his cool facade crumbling with every unanswered plea. Part of me, the part that still remembered the man I thought I'd married, wanted to answer, to hear his explanation. But I squashed that impulse every time it surfaced. I couldn't afford to be weak, not now. It was on the 5th day after everything fell apart that I finally decided to answer. My phone lit up with his name, the cheesy picture of us on our honeymoon staring back at me. I'd meant to change it, but somehow, I couldn't bring myself to erase that last visual reminder of happier times. I let it ring, once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, I picked up, but said nothing. Samantha. Daniel's voice was strained, panicky. Sam, is that you? Please, say something. I remained silent, letting the tension build. I could hear his ragged breathing on the other end of the line. Hello, Daniel, I finally said, my voice calm and controlled, belying the storm of emotions raging inside me. There was a sharp intake of breath, then silence. I imagined him, wherever he was, trying to compose himself, to find the right words to manipulate me once again. Well, those days were over. Sam, he tried again, his voice softer now, cajoling. Baby, we need to talk. This is all just a big misunderstanding. I almost laughed at the audacity. A misunderstanding? Is that what he called stealing my home, my memories, my entire life? Is it, Daniel? I asked, keeping my voice level. Please, enlighten me. What part did I misunderstand? The part where you lied about your mother being sick? Or the part where you stole my home and disappeared with all the money? I heard him swallow hard. It's complicated, Sam. If you'll just let me explain -oh, I think you've done enough explaining, I cut him off. In fact, I think you've said quite enough over the past few months. It's my turn to talk now. There was a long pause. When Daniel spoke again, his voice had lost its honeyed tone. Now he just sounded tired, and more than a little scared. What do you want, Sam? What did I want? Revenge, justice, my old life back, all of those things and none of them. What I really wanted was to understand why. Why had he done this? Why had he thrown away our life together for money? But I knew I couldn't ask those questions. Not yet. Not until I had the upper hand. I want you to sweat, Daniel, I said, my voice hard. I want you to feel even a fraction of the fear and uncertainty that I've been feeling. And trust me, you will. Sam, listen, he said, his voice taking on an edge of desperation. If this is about the house, the money, I'll fix it. I'll make it right. Just, please, tell me what you did. I raised an eyebrow at that. What I did? That was interesting. And what exactly do you think I did, Daniel? There was a pause, then a frustrated sigh. I don't know, Sam. That's the problem. These messages you've been sending, what do they mean? What do you know? I smiled to myself, even though he couldn't see it. You'll see soon enough, I said, echoing the words from my earlier message. That was all it took. Daniel's carefully constructed facade cracked wide open. No, 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 he mumbled, his voice rising in panic. You don't understand. You don't know what you're dealing with. Sam, please, whatever you think you're doing, stop. It's dangerous. Dangerous? Now that was intriguing. What had Daniel gotten himself mixed up in? But I couldn't let him know I was in the dark. I had to keep him off balance. I understand perfectly well what I'm dealing with, I said, injecting a note of confidence into my voice that I didn't entirely feel. The question is, do you? There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Where are you? He pleaded. We need to talk. Face to face. This isn't something we can discuss over the phone. I almost snorted at that. As if I'd be foolish enough to meet him in person. I don't think so, Daniel. I'm quite comfortable where I am, thank you. Sam, please, he begged, all pretense of control gone now. You don't know what you're getting into. These people, they're dangerous. If they think you know something, these people. I interrupted, my mind racing. What kind of trouble had Daniel gotten himself into? And who exactly are these people, Daniel? There was a long pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, trying to figure out how much I knew, how much he could safely reveal. I can't talk about this over the phone, he finally said. Please, Sam. For your own safety, if nothing else. Meet me. Let me explain everything. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. Part of me was curious, I had to admit. What kind of mess had Daniel gotten himself into that he was this scared? But a larger part of me, the part that had been burned too many times already, knew better than to trust him again. No, I said firmly. No more lies, Daniel. No more manipulations. You made your choice when you walked out that door with my money and my home. Now you get to live with the consequences. Sam Dashi started, but I cut him off. Goodbye, Daniel. I'm sure I'll be seeing you soon. I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone, half expecting it to ring again immediately. But it remained silent. As the adrenaline of the conversation wore off, I found myself shaking. What had I gotten myself into? Daniel had sounded genuinely scared. And who were these people he had mentioned? For a brief moment, I considered calling him back, demanding a full explanation. But I squashed that impulse. I couldn't show weakness now, couldn't let him know how much his words had rattled me. Instead, I opened my laptop and started searching. If Daniel was mixed up in something dangerous, there had to be traces of it somewhere. Bank records, police reports, something. I might not have been able to see through his lies when we were together, but I was damn sure going to uncover the truth now. As I delved deeper into Daniel's past, a picture began to emerge. Small discrepancies in his work history, unexplained absences, large sums of money moving in and out of accounts I'd never known existed. It was like peeling back layers of an onion, each revelation leading to more questions. By the time the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my small apartment, I had a clearer picture of the man I'd married. And it wasn't pretty. Daniel, it seemed, had been living a double life for years. The charming bank employee I'd fallen in love with was just a facade, hiding a web of lies and illegal activities. As I sat back, rubbing my tired eyes, I felt a mix of emotions wash over me. Anger at being so thoroughly deceived. Shame at not having seen through his lies. But mostly, I felt a grim determination. Daniel thought he could just walk away from the mess he'd made, leaving me to pick up the pieces. Well, he had another thing coming. I picked up my phone and typed out another message. Tick-tock, Daniel. Your time is running out. As I hit send, I felt a small thrill of satisfaction. Let him stew in his own juices for a while longer. Meanwhile, I had work to do. Daniel's web of lies was unraveling, and I was going to be there to watch it all come crashing down. They say knowledge is power, but as I sat in my tiny apartment, surrounded by printouts and scribbled notes, I was beginning to think that knowledge was just a recipe for a migraine. The more I dug into Daniel's past, the more confused I became. It was like trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces were missing and the other half didn't seem to fit. I'd been at it for days, sleeping little and eating less. My dining table had become a war room, covered in bank statements, property records, and hastily scrawled timelines. But for every question I answered, two more popped up in its place. It was clear that Daniel had been involved in something shady, but the exact nature of his dealings remained frustratingly out of reach. I needed help, someone with resources and expertise beyond my own. That's when I remembered Mike, an old friend of my father's who worked as a private investigator. I'd always thought of Mike as a bit of a character, a gruff, no-nonsense type who looked like he'd stepped straight out of a noir film, complete with a weathered trench coat and a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. But right now, he was exactly the kind of ally I needed. When I called him and explained my situation, He didn't ask questions or offer sympathy. He just grunted and said, "I'll be there in an hour." True to his word, Mike showed up at my door 60 minutes later, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Which, given his line of work, was entirely possible. "All right, kid," he said as he stepped inside, his eyes sweeping over my makeshift investigation board. "Let's see what mess you've gotten yourself into." For the next few hours, I walked Mike through everything I'd uncovered. He listened in silence, occasionally nodding or grunting, his eyes narrowing as the picture became clearer. "Your boy's in deep," he finally said, leaning back in his chair with a sigh. "Way deep." "How deep?" I asked, my stomach churning with a mix of anticipation and dread. Mike ran a hand over his stubbled chin. "From what you've shown me, looks like he's mixed up with some pretty nasty characters. Money laundering, maybe some fraud. Could be ties to organized crime." I felt the blood drain from my face. Organized crime? The Daniel I knew, or thought I knew, was more likely to organize a church bake sale than get involved with the mob. But how? I stammered. "He worked at a bank. He was normal." Mike let out a humorless chuckle. "Kid, you'd be surprised how many normal folks are sitting on a mountain of secrets. Banks are perfect for this kind of operation. Easy to move money around, cook the books." I sat back, my mind reeling. "So what do we do now?" "Now?" Mike raised an eyebrow. "Now, we dig deeper. And we do it carefully. These aren't the kind of people you want to piss off." Over the next few days, Mike became a constant presence in my life. He'd show up at odd hours, always with new information, new leads to follow. We were piecing together a picture of Daniel's double life, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. It turned out that Daniel's job at the local bank was just a cover. In reality, he was part of a sophisticated money laundering operation, helping to clean millions of dollars for a dangerous criminal organization. The sale of our house, my house, was just the latest in a long line of transactions designed to move dirty money. As we uncovered more, I kept up my campaign of cryptic messages to Daniel. Every few hours, I'd send him a text. Sometimes it was a single word, other times a vague statement. "Tick-tock," I wrote one morning. "The truth always comes out," I sent that afternoon. I could almost feel his panic growing with each message. His responses became more frantic, more desperate. "Sam, please," he'd write. "You don't know what you're dealing with. These people are dangerous." But I did know. Thanks to Mike, I was starting to understand just how deep this rabbit hole went. And I was determined to see it through to the end. One evening, as Mike and I were poring over some financial records, my phone buzzed with a call from Daniel. I looked at Mike, who nodded. "Put it on speaker," he mouthed. I answered the call, my heart pounding. "Hello, Daniel," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "Sam," he breathed, sounding relieved. "Thank God. Listen, we need to talk. Face to face. This has gone too far." I glanced at Mike, who shook his head slightly. "I don't think so, Daniel," I replied. "I'm quite comfortable where I am." "You don't understand," Daniel said, his voice rising in pitch. "These people, they're asking questions. About you. About what you know." "I can't protect you if protect me," I interrupted, feeling a surge of anger. "Like you protected me when you stole my home and disappeared with all our money." There was a pause, then Daniel spoke again, his voice low and urgent. "Sam, I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But this is bigger than us now. These people, they don't mess around. If they think you're a threat." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Maybe I am a threat, Daniel. Maybe I know more than you think I do." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Daniel spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What did you do, Sam?" I smiled, even though he couldn't see me. "You'll find out soon enough." With that, I ended the call. Mike looked at me, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "You're playing a dangerous game, kid," he said. "I know," I replied, feeling a mix of fear and exhilaration. "But it's the only game I've got." Over the next few days, we continued our investigation, digging deeper into Daniel's connections. Mike used his contacts in law enforcement to gather more information, always careful not to raise any red flags. We were getting close to something big, I could feel it. Meanwhile, I kept up my psychological warfare against Daniel. Each message I sent was calculated to keep him off balance, to make him wonder just how much I knew. The walls are closing in, I texted one morning. Time to face the music, I sent that evening. His responses became increasingly erratic. Sometimes he'd beg me to stop, to meet him so he could explain. Other times he'd lash out, accusing me of not understanding what I was getting into. But beneath it all, I could sense his growing panic. It all came to a head on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was alone in my apartment, Mike having left to follow up on a lead. My phone buzzed with another call from Daniel. I answered, prepared for another round of pleading or threats. But this time was different. Daniel's voice was strained, panicked. "Sam," he gasped, "they're here. They know. I don't know how, but they know." I felt my blood run cold. "Daniel, what are you talking about? Who's there?" But before he could answer, I heard a commotion in the background. Raised voices, the sound of something breaking. Daniel's voice, suddenly distant from the phone, shouting something I couldn't make out. Then a sharp crack, like a gunshot, and the line went dead. I sat there, my phone still pressed to my ear, my heart pounding. What had just happened? Was Daniel okay? And more importantly, what did this mean for me? With shaking hands, I dialed Mike's number. When he answered, I could barely get the words out. "Mike," I said, my voice trembling, "something's happened. I think Daniel's in trouble." There was a pause, then Mike's gruff voice came through, steady and reassuring. "Stay where you are, kid. Don't open the door for anyone. I'm on my way." As I sat in my darkened apartment, waiting for Mike and jumping at every sound, I couldn't help but wonder, had I gone too far? In my quest for revenge, had I set in motion events that were now spiraling out of control? One thing was certain, the game had changed. And I had a sinking feeling that the real danger was only just beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. After that terrifying phone call from Daniel, I felt like I was living in a waking nightmare. Every car that drove by my apartment made me jump, every knock on the door sent my heart racing. I kept expecting to see stern-faced men in dark suits coming to deal with me the same way they had apparently dealt with Daniel. Mike had arrived at my apartment that night, his face grim. He'd insisted on moving me to a safe house, a small, nondescript cabin on the outskirts of town that I hadn't even known existed. "Can't be too careful," he'd muttered as he ushered me inside, his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. 4 days, we heard nothing. No news about Daniel, no threatening messages, nothing. The silence was almost worse than any overt threat. It left my imagination free to run wild, conjuring up increasingly terrifying scenarios. "No news is good news," Mike would say each morning as he brought me a fresh cup of coffee and yesterday's newspaper. But I could see the worry lines deepening on his weathered face. It was on the 4th day that we finally got some information. Mike burst into the cabin, his usually impassive face alive with excitement. "They found him," he announced without preamble. I felt my heart stop. "Daniel?" I whispered, afraid to hear the answer. Mike nodded. "Alive. But only just." He filled me in on the details as I sat there, my coffee growing cold in my hands. Daniel had been found on the outskirts of the city, beaten within an inch of his life. No ID, no money, no memory of the last 48 hours. He was in the hospital now, under police protection. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice sounding small and scared even to my own ears. Mike sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Now, we wait. The police are involved, which complicates things. But it also means you're safer than you were before. These guys, they don't like attention. With the cops sniffing around, they're likely to lay low for a while." I nodded, trying to process it all. I should have felt relieved, I suppose. Daniel was alive. The immediate danger seemed to have passed. But all I felt was a deep, gnawing guilt. "This is my fault," I whispered, more to myself than to Mike. "If I hadn't pushed him, If I hadn't sent those messages. Mike's hand on my shoulder startled me. "Hey," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "You didn't do this. Daniel made his own choices. He got himself into this mess long before you knew anything about it." I knew he was right, but it didn't make me feel any better. I had wanted revenge, had wanted to make Daniel suffer. But not like this. Never like this. The next few weeks passed in a strange limbo. I was allowed to return to my apartment, but Mike insisted on staying close by. "Just in case," he said, though I think we both knew the real danger had passed. I tried to get back to some semblance of normal life. I went back to work at the diner, smiling and chatting with customers as if my whole world hadn't been turned upside down. But every time the bell over the door jingled, I'd look up, half expecting to see Daniel walking in. But he never did. According to Mike's sources, Daniel remained in the hospital, recovering slowly. The police were keeping a tight lid on the investigation, but rumors were swirling. Money laundering, organized crime, fraud, all the things Mike and I had uncovered, now out in the open. It was strange, seeing my private pain splashed across the local news. "Local bank employee involved in major crime ring," the headlines screamed. I'd watch the reports, seeing grainy photos of Daniel, my Daniel, being described as a key player in a sophisticated criminal operation. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. This was the man who had cried at our wedding, who had spent weeks agonizing over what color to paint our living room. How could he have been living this double life all along? But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of the lies, tired of the fear, tired of the constant churning of emotions in my gut. It was about a month after Daniel had been found that Mike came to me with news. "He's asking to see you," he said, watching me carefully for my reaction. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Daniel?" I asked, though I knew the answer. Mike nodded. "He's being moved to a minimum security prison hospital next week. He's well enough to be questioned now, and the DA is pushing for a full confession. But before all that, he's asking to talk to you." I sat there, my mind whirling. Did I want to see Daniel? Did I want to hear whatever explanation or justification he had to offer? Part of me wanted to refuse, to leave him to face the consequences of his actions alone, the way he'd left me. But another part of me, a part one wasn't entirely comfortable acknowledging, needed closure. Needed to look him in the eye one last time and understand why. Why he had lied, why he had stolen from me, why he had thrown away our life together. "Okay," I heard myself say. "I'll see him." The prison hospital was a grim, utilitarian place. As I followed a stone-faced guard down sterile hallways, I tried to prepare myself for what I was about to see. But nothing could have readied me for the sight of Daniel, lying pale and broken in a hospital bed, handcuffed to the railing. He looked up as I entered, his eyes widening in surprise. "Sam," he breathed, his voice weak and raspy. "You came." I stood there, unsure of what to do or say. This man, this stranger in front of me, how could he be the same person I had loved, had built a life with? "Why did you want to see me, Daniel?" I asked, proud of how steady my voice sounded. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When he opened them again, they were filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it doesn't change anything, doesn't fix anything. But I needed you to hear it from me. I'm so sorry." I felt my own eyes filling with tears, but I blinked them back. "I wouldn't cry. Not here, not now. Sorry doesn't bring back my home," I said. "It doesn't erase the lies, the betrayal." Daniel nodded, wincing as the movement clearly caused him pain. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness, Sam. I needed you to know that it was real. Us, our life together, that wasn't a lie. I loved you. I still love you." I laughed then, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed in the small room. "Love? You don't betray someone you love, Daniel. You don't steal from them, lie to them, leave them with nothing." He didn't respond to that, just lay there looking at me with those sad eyes. After a moment, he spoke again. "What are you going to do now?" It was a good question. One I'd been asking myself for weeks now. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Start over, I guess. Somewhere new, somewhere without all these memories. Daniel nodded slowly. "You'll be okay," he said, and there was a certainty in his voice that surprised me. "You're strong, Sam. Stronger than I ever was." I stood there for a moment longer, looking at this man who had been the center of my world for so long. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out of the room. As I stepped out into the sunshine, I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The anger, the bitterness, the thirst for revenge, it was all still there, but it no longer consumed me. I thought about what Daniel had said. I was strong. I had survived this, had come out the other side battered but not broken. And now, for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel before: hope. As I walked to my car, I pulled out my phone and dialed a familiar number. "Hey, Sally," I said when she answered. "Remember how we always talked about opening that little cafe?" "Yeah, I think I'm ready to talk about that again." I got into my car, feeling a smile tugging at my lips for the first time in what felt like forever. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, I knew that. But I was ready to face it, ready to start building a new life, my life, on my terms. As I drove away from the prison, I didn't look back. The past was behind me now. It was time to look forward, to the future I would create for myself. A future without lies, without betrayal. A future that was entirely my own.